Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name's Aaron Newcomb. Perhaps you've seen in the news lately, or even tried out yourself, this new tool called ChatGPT. It's a language learning and processing tool that's able to output pretty convincing term papers, answers to complex questions, and even write some Python code. And so that got me thinking, I wonder if it's able to write programs for the venerable Commodore 64. What am I doing? This is a show about ChatGPT. Let's have ChatGPT write the introduction for this show. Write me a 100-word introduction to a YouTube video about whether or not you can use ChatGPT to write programs for the Commodore 64. All right. Let's see what it spits out. Welcome to our video on using ChatGPT to write programs for the Commodore 64. In this video, we will explore the capabilities of the ChatGPT language model and how it can be used to generate code for the Commodore 64, a popular home computer from the 1980s. We will demonstrate how ChatGPT can be used to write simple programs and discuss the limitations and considerations when using it for this purpose. Whether you're a retro computer enthusiast or a curious developer, this video will give you a better understanding of the capabilities of ChatGPT and its potential applications. So join us as we dive into the world of using ChatGPT to write programs for the Commodore 64. Not bad. Okay, so if you haven't used or heard about ChatGPT, you might be wondering, well, what the heck is it? Now, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details here because I want to get to the meat of the episode, so to speak. But ChatGPT is an AI algorithm that generates a language model or multiple language models. And what that means is it takes in information, in this case, I believe it's mostly just from the public internet, and develops models so that you can ask it to do things like write me a paper about Shakespeare or whatever, and you give it that data, and it's ingested enough information that it will output a paper about Shakespeare in whatever style you give it. So this is a language model. It's not going to take over the world or anything. It is very cool, but basically what you get out sometimes doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you really read it. It'll sound good a lot of times because the words are placed in areas where they should be based on, again, the input that it was given. But sometimes the output that you get is just a little bit off or sounds a little bit weird. So yeah, and there's also for teachers and other people, there's people that have put together other algorithms that can detect whether ChatGPT has been used. So this is important for my wife, for example, who is a middle school teacher. She can use those detection tools to tell whether ChatGPT has generated the paper that she asked her students to write. So let me just give you a quick example here of what this looks like. When you go to ChatGPT, if you search for ChatGPT, you'll land on this page. It's put out by a company called OpenAI, and they say in here that what is essentially a chatbot that they've created using this AI algorithm will ask follow-up questions. It will admit when it makes a mistake, or if it doesn't know something, it won't try to do something that it can't do, and it will tell you it can't do it, and perhaps even offer alternatives. And we'll see some of this as we go through the episode today. Let's ask it to write a few paragraphs here. Write a 3-paragraph essay.
In what way does the author's use of the prison symbolize
describing Star Trek, the original series? And what's cool about this is I could probably even put TOS, which most people, the original series is usually abbreviated to TOS, but let's just see what it comes up with. Here we go. And you can see it writes this out for you in real time, almost like you're chatting with a real person. Of course, it's typing faster, certainly, than I can type, but it will type the answer out for you over time, and then you can read it. So let's see what it comes up with. Okay, so you can pause here and read this if you want to, but it's pretty good. It's a pretty good description. Talks about the characters, talks about when the series was introduced, talks about, what happened after the series was done. And so this is pretty good, I think. But then you can either regenerate this response and it'll do something new, perhaps a variation on this, or you can change the input that you gave it. And so we could say something like, in the style of a fifth grader, and submit that. Now you'll see that the language used changes. So Star Trek is a really cool TV show that was made a long time ago. This is what is really cool about this tool, is you give it a context in which to create these three paragraphs, and it does a really good job. You can see the paragraphs are much shorter. The sentences are much shorter because that's the way that fifth graders write. And so pause this now if you want to take a look at this different version of basically the same question that I gave it. It's pretty impressive if you ask me. We're going to get into some basic programs in just a minute, but if you're finding this episode interesting, hit the like button and be sure to check out the sponsor of today's episode, PCBWay. Not only does PCBWay provide PCB manufacturing, CNC milling, and 3D printing, but they also have a project page. And if we go check that out, you'll see that they have a multitude of projects that are submitted from the community, and these are voted up by you. And you can find these all on the project page. And look what we have here, a Raspberry Pi Pico ZX Spectrum microdrive hardware emulator. And I'm going to be getting that project so that I can feature it here on the Retro Hack Shack. And on the project page, they also have a store where you can buy all sorts of tools and modules to help you with your retro tinkering. So check out the projects page at PCBWay, and I thank them for their support of the Retro Hack Shack. Okay, so the first thing I did was I asked it to write a basic program for the Commodore 64 that prints Retro Hack Shack all over the screen. And I asked for a number of variations on this. I hit the regenerate response button a few times to see what I would get. The most simple thing that it gave me actually is the classic 10 print, whatever you want to print on the screen, 20 go to 10, and then run. And that's perfect. That's exactly what the response that I was kind of looking for. So I was pretty impressed that it gave me that response. But it gave me another response. That one, of course, will work if you put that into a Commodore 64, by the way. One of the responses it gave was the same program, but then it gave me some details underneath describing that this program uses the print command to display the text, and the go-to command goes back up to the top, basically what I just said. However, this response was a little bit different. This response was a little bit more in depth, and it was trying to do some interesting things with poke and peek commands, and it does kind of describe what it's trying to do. For example, it says the poke commands at the beginning of and the end of the inner loop are used to change the screen color. So, we'll have to see if this program actually runs. And it talks about using 2 nested loops. So in terms of programming and kind of some of the things that you could use poke and peek commands for, it's kind of getting that right, although it may not be technically right. So instead of transferring files and running back and forth to an actual Commodore 64, just for ease of use and simplicity, I'm going to be using an emulator to emulate the C64 so I can switch back and forth and show what's going on. So I've got Vice running. I can bring that up. Vice is a great emulator for the Commodore 64, and it does allow you to paste text into the emulator, and it will type it out on the screen. So let's go ahead and try to do that now. And one nice thing here is that ChatGPT has put everything in uppercase, which is how it would appear if you typed it out on an actual Commodore 64. It would be uppercase by default on a standard 64, used uppercase and basic. So we can just copy this and then switch back here and paste it. And unfortunately, what happens here is that the translation between my computer and the emulator actually takes that uppercase as a Shift P on the keyboard. Now, Shift P on a regular computer keyboard produces an uppercase P. But on a Commodore, if you know your Commodore, then when you hit Shift P, you actually get some of these diagram or drawing characters, this extra character set that's embedded into the C64. And you can use those characters to make little pictures and things like that if you want to. But Shift P on a Commodore is not going to give you uppercase P. So what you need to use is, if you're going to do this and follow along at home, is you need to use some sort of tool like Notepad++, or I use the Atom IDE, something that has a function to translate uppercase to lowercase. Take all the uppercase characters, translate those to lowercase. And so I've done that here. So I've got the same program, just everything, all the letters at least, are in lowercase here. So that's the only thing I've changed. So let's copy that, and then we will paste that into, there we go, paste that into the emulator, and you can see that that's looking better now. So now we can go ahead and run this and see if this ChatGPT program works out of the box. And unfortunately, as you can see, it does not. So it basically just locks up the system. The CPU is still running, I can see down there in the corner, but eventually it will just lock up. So let's see if we can take a look at the program and see what's going on. The really interesting thing here is that if you know BASIC, after your first couple of 10 print something and go to 10 type programs that you do, very quickly afterwards, you'll run into some pokes or maybe some peek commands where you are setting memory to a certain function. And by doing so, you can do things like change the color of the letters, which is kind of what it looks like anyway ChatGPT is trying to achieve here. Okay, so I know it actually said screen color, not text color, but I'm just going with text color because that's what came into my mind at this point in the video, so sue me. So this is an example of where it looks kind of like it did the right thing. It wrote some successful for loops here, and it added these poke and peek statements, but the poke and peek statements that it wrote are not correct. So if we actually take a look at the memory address 53265, which is what that poke was referencing there, this isn't far off what we want to do. You can see that bit 6 here controls the extended color mode. If it's set to 1, then the character on the text screen can have one of 4 background colors. So you could use this potentially to change the background color of either a single character or a string of characters like we've put in here. So it's not that far off, but you wouldn't invoke it in this way. You would invoke it like this, poke the number in that we're talking about here, and then you would peek it or say or 64, for example, to engage that extended color mode. Or you could, various versions of this will do back to, there's some examples here that will take it and do different things. So while this is very, very close to what we're looking for here, it's not quite the exact thing that we're looking for. And it certainly isn't invoked in the correct manner. Now, the other poke and peek statement that was down below was referencing memory address 198. And what that does is it clears prior key presses. So one of the things that they recommend on the C64 wiki that this might have been used for is where you want the computer to be thinking for a minute. So it's not accepting any user input. And you could use this basically to make sure that nothing actually, even if you were trying to type something on the screen, it's not actually typing anything on the screen because you're clearing the keyboard buffer with this command to avoid anything being typed in. So yeah, again, it has to do with characters and the way that the computer handles characters, but it's not exactly what we're looking for. So what I thought I'd do is see if I can make some minor changes to the program here to get it to do kind of what ChatGPT was saying it was trying to do, which is to change the color of the text and make it appear all over the screen. So what I ended up doing is I actually ended up taking out one of the loops, and instead of using the pokes and peeks that it was originally trying to do, I ended up using poke 646, which does change the text color, and I used a random number. So it should change the text color randomly each time it prints Retro Hack Shack on the screen. And it'll just do that in a loop. So let's go ahead, and I left this 0 to 39. No reason necessarily to use that, but I just thought I'd just keep that because it was in the original response of ChatGPT. So now if we copy this somewhat modified basic program here, and we paste that into the emulator. Oh, there we go. And we'll run that. Let's see what happens. There we go. That's, I think, kind of what ChatGPT was trying to achieve with this, was different color characters on the screen, but printing all over the screen like this. So with a few minor modifications, we were able to make this program work. I just think it was interesting that the response to this, or at least one of the responses, was this completely different idea than I thought it would come up with, which was the basic 10, print this, go to 10 type statement. It actually tried to do something different, even though it didn't quite have all the context it needed to make a working program. Now, for this next test, I decided to do something a little more advanced, but still in basic, just to see what ChatGPT would throw out. My expectations at this point are pretty low, I should say, based on what it spat out previously, but I thought, who knows, maybe it can solve this one. So one of the classic things that a lot of people did, and I think they still teach in some programming courses, is to make a version of the game Space Invaders or, Tetris or something like that, using the language of choice that you want to build your program out of. In this case, we're still looking at BASIC, so I asked ChatGPT to write a basic program for the Commodore 64 that runs Space Invaders. Now, its first response was that it was honest and said, I'm not able to write a program for the Commodore 64 to run Space Invaders. And it says that the programming language is quite complex and difficult for me, in this case, ChatGPT, but I can provide you with some resources to help you learn how to program, which was kind of cool. At least it seems like it's an honest response there. But then I shortened it a little bit, not to be basic for the Commodore 64, but just to be basic in general, because I thought that would widen the scope of its available language to draw from. As a language model, I can help you understand the basic concepts behind programming a Space Invaders game, but I'm not able to execute the code. Unfortunately, what it returned was more like Python than it is BASIC. So I asked one more time, write a game like Space Invaders written in the BASIC programming language. And I even capitalized the word BASIC because I thought, again, that might help it land somewhere in the middle to know that I wanted a BASIC program. And sure enough, it did spit out a program that says it's a BASIC example, and it explains a little bit about how it works, the fact that it uses InKey, which we'll talk about in just a second, but it gave me a program, at least a starting place to try. So we'll just copy this and paste it into the emulator. There we go. Before we even run this, I can tell you it's not going to work, and we can see why here. It actually, in the translation, this has nothing to do with ChatGPT, but in the translation between my normal computer and the emulator, it has incorrectly converted some of these keys. So see here where it says player arrow, left arrow X. If we look at our program, that's supposed to be player underscore X, for example. So it wasn't able to translate that. So what I did was I actually changed all of these variable names and took out that underscore character, because the underscore obviously isn't going to work, because the interpreter is not going to know what an underscore is, or the left arrow means in BASIC. So I basically just took out all the underscores, and we can see if that will work or not. So let's go ahead and paste this back in the emulator. Now all the variable names are consistent. Took out the underscore character, and we can actually try this and see what happens. So let's run it. Okay, so right away we get a syntax error in line 50. And if we list line 50, we can see that it doesn't like the fact that score equals 0. Now, the reason for this isn't because we did anything wrong. It's just the variable name that we use can't be used on this version of BASIC in the Commodore 64 because it contains the qualifier OR. So if you did anything you did here that contained OR, so you could rename this variable, call it SCOR or ORE, none of those will work, because OR to BASIC means you're comparing this OR that, and it doesn't understand that that is actually inside of a more complex variable name. So we need to then go change the variable name. So I did that. We're getting closer now. So I've changed that variable name just to SC instead, and I've changed all the references to it inside the program. So now let's again paste this in. So now this is in. Let's go ahead and run it and see what it does. Okay, this one actually does something out of the box. And if we take a look at the program, it says that we should be pressing A and D to move player X either one direction or the other direction. Basically, you give it a -1 or give it a +1, which should change the numbers that are displaying on the screen. Actually, if we take a look at what's happening in the game without pressing any A or D keys here, the alien position is just incrementing by 1. Nothing else is changing. So we need to do a few modifications and maybe get this to work a little bit closer to what ChatGPT intended. So I changed a few things. First of all, if I am correct in this, and I'm not a professional basic programmer, I just learned when I was a kid, but InKey is a special variable name that works on some systems to be able to automatically pause and wait for you to give it an input, a keyboard input. In this case, it would be A or D, but I don't believe InKey works on the Commodore 64. I think you have to use a get statement. So I kept InKey, even though it doesn't really have a special connotation here. I'm just using it as a variable name, InKey $, because why not? It's less to have to change in my program. And so instead of just using InKey, I said get InKey, and then I could use BASIC to determine what the key was. I'm still using A and D and incrementing by 1 and -1 here. The other thing that I changed in here was I put a little bit of delay in here so that instead of getting that list that changes so frequently, it'll help just be able to see if anything's changing in the program with a bit of a delay there in the update. And the next thing I did was I put a couple of random number functions in here. Basically, what I wanted to do was make it a little bit more challenging by having the alien coordinates move either by a factor of 1, 2, or 3 spaces. Instead of just moving 1 space every time, I wanted the alien to move a bit more randomly within some constraints. So what I did here was I took a random number 1 through 3, and if that random number comes back as a 1, then I move the alien by whatever that number was in the positive direction. Likewise, if that number comes back as a 2, then I move the alien a negative amount in that whatever the dice roll was. If it comes up as 3, then the alien doesn't move at all. And that was basically all I changed. And some of that was more for my comfort than anything else because I couldn't keep up with all of those numbers scrolling on the screen. This time, I think I changed some line numbers in the program. So I'm going to type new first. And then we'll paste this in. There it goes. Let's go ahead and run it and see if it works. Okay, so here we see that our score is 0. The player is at coordinates 24, 24, and the alien is at coordinates 3 and 3. And because I'm not really moving the other coordinates, this is really more of a unidirectional game here where it's just along the x-axis. But you can see here the alien is jumping around by those random numbers. It's at 5, now it's 6, now it's 7, 8. Let's see, yeah, there it jumped to 11 and then 13. So if I press A, I should move. Let's see, yep, I'm moving a minus direction now, and I'm trying to get my player to line up with the alien's coordinates, and if it does, I should see the score increment. Oh, there it goes. So when my coordinates lined up with the alien's coordinates, I got a 1 on the score, and then I got a few more 1s because the alien jumped around and came back to my position. So yeah, it's not really a true graphical representation of Space Invaders, but it kind of simulates that. It uses your imagination to simulate where your character is on the screen, and at least provide some sort of gaming experience here that you could use. Now, those of you who are experts in BASIC and remember this really well, I would love to know something I can't figure out here, which is, as you can see, player Y starts out at 24 and player X starts out at 40. I only update player X throughout the program, but somehow this player Y value is also getting updated. So you can see down here at the bottom, I print out the coordinates for player X and player Y, and alien X and alien Y. And even though I never update the Y variables here, it seems like they're getting updated in the program. So every time I move, both the X and the Y variables are getting updated. So if anybody wants to tell me in the comments below why that's happening in this basic program, I would really appreciate it. And I thank you in advance for your responses. I'm sure it comes down to some sort of basic syntax that I've put in here that just so happens to make that work. I just can't figure out why. Okay, last but not least, I thought it would be fun to try an assembly language example. And so I asked ChatGPT to write a program in assembly for the Commodore 64. I had tried a couple more of these and they didn't quite return what I was looking, anything really that I could try. But if I kept it generic and just said, write a program in assembly for the Commodore 64, at least it came back and said, look, I'm not able to write an assembly. It's too complicated, but I can give you some resources to help you learn. And it says, here's an example of a simple assembly program that prints out hello world on the screen. I thought, great, well, at least this is something to try. So here's the program that it gave me. And the other thing that it told me is that number one, it's not meant to be efficient. Got it. Understand. And then number two, you can use, it gave me like some tools that I could use to actually assemble the code, to compile the code and turn it into a format that can be run, a compiled program. And it recommends DASM or ACME, ACME, to assemble the code. So I thought, great, I'll try DASM. That's the first thing that it gave me. So now the interesting thing here is that based on ChatGPT's response to me, I'm actually learning something because I'm not an expert at all in assembler for the 6502. In fact, I've never really written a whole lot of any code really to speak of in assembler for the 6502, but I thought, hey, this is pretty cool because someone like me gets some actual tips here. And it turns out that these are actual tools that you can use. So in the process of using this tool, I'm actually learning something and having fun, it turns out, in learning this. And so I thought that was a nice side effect of using this tool. So let's do what we did before. In this case, we're not going to have to worry about any copying and pasting directly. So we don't have to worry about uppercase, lowercase anymore, at least in terms of the translation between the emulator. But let's go ahead and compile this code using DASM as it recommended, and we will see if that works. DASM, by the way, runs on the command line. Again, I'm kind of new to this. But I was able to download it. You just run DASM with a couple of command line options, and it compiles your code and outputs the compiled program. In this case, I was dealing with some stuff that I was messing around with. Again, I was learning about assembler, and so I've got a bunch of errors here. But I was able to get the output of the program, and I just called it hello.prg. So I can take my compiled program, this hello.prg, move it over, drop it, and it will actually load and run the program. Unfortunately, in this case, it comes back with a syntax error in 53792. So let's go ahead and take a look at the code again and see what's going on here. So the biggest issue with the program is that it runs, this is the start address here. And unfortunately, it's using the start address of BASIC. So the Commodore 64 isn't actually able to run this at that memory location, or when it tries to run it, I think, as a basic program. Experts out there can tell me if that is accurate, an accurate description or not. But basically 0801 is the memory address where basic commands are stored or loaded so that they can be run by the basic interpreter. And so using that particular address isn't working. So here's what I came up with to help address this and try to keep the program as much like what ChatGPT gave me as possible. This part up here is just some things that I need for the assembler, for the DASM assembler to actually compile this program. So those can be ignored. But basically here, I'm still trying to keep that same address that ChatGPT recommended. But what I have to do then is write a little basic program at that address in order to load the program at the correct address space. So what I'm doing is now, instead of loading my program at 0801, I'm actually loading the meat of the program here, the actual assembler, at address 1000 instead. And in order to call the program, I have to type in a command in BASIC, which is called sys. So you write sys space the memory address in decimal format, and it will actually load the correct program. So the decimal format, or the translation between hex here, hex 1000, 1000 is actually 4096. So in order to run this program, if I start it at 1000, I'm going to have to type in to the command line sys space 4096. That will jump to this memory address and load that program. And I've made a version of the program to demonstrate this. So I made a version of the program that just loads the program into the 1000 memory address, and I didn't use any basic program to load it. And what happens is when we load this program, it tries to run. It can't. So, but I can type in sys 4096, and when I do that manually, it does run the program. So all we really need now is that little basic, that bit of basic that runs at the beginning to do what I just did, which is type in sys 4096 return to get this thing to run automatically. I hope that makes sense. Again, this is the first time I've really done much with assembler, so I hope I got that description correct. But it all comes down basically to this one line of code here, which is all of this example stuff that I've commented out and just the raw code for that basic program that needs to run. And I found this online somewhere on a website, and it seems to work. So now let's go ahead and take this program that is, again, going to run this little basic program. And by the way, this is how people used to load. If you've ever loaded a program from disk or from tape and it starts automatically, this is most likely, or some version of this is how they used to start those programs, how they used to make those programs run automatically, the ones that you didn't have to actually type in run. This is how they would make those work. Otherwise, if they didn't do that, then the user would have to know they have to put in the manual someplace in order to start this game, type in sys space and the memory address for where the program was loaded to get it to run. Okay, so now we can load in that completed program with the basic script, and there you go. It started running right away, loaded in automatically, and ran it. So I don't think we can fault ChatGPT necessarily for not giving us all of that extra information. It said it was going to give us an example of a simple program in 6502 assembly language, and that is 99% correct, except for the fact that in this case with the Commodore 64, we're just not able to use this starting memory address, and that I can kind of give that one to ChatGPT. So I would say this is a 99% success. I didn't have to change any of the load instructions or jump instructions or any of those things in the program. All of that worked out of the box. It was just the memory address that we had to change to get it to work. So I would call this a big fat success. If you're still wondering what else you can do with ChatGPT and your favorite retro system, why not ask it to create a poem for you about your system to wax eloquently? That is what one of the users on one of my Discord servers did, and it came up with this response. Now, it does repeat a word. It's not perfect, so we'll have to just excuse it for that, but here we go. The Commodore 64, a classic machine with colors bright and graphics lean. A computer of the people, for the people, a tool to work and play equal. With its 64K of memory grand and its SID sound chip so grand, it brought us games and programs too, and memories that still shine through. From Summer's Games to Elite, from Bard's Tale to Paradroid Treat, it gave us hours of joy and fun and made the future brighter every one. But now it's back, a blast from the past, kept alive by enthusiasts, a vibrant scene that will last. With new games, programs, and hardware too, the Commodore 64 lives on, forever in our hearts anew. So yeah, not bad. Why not? Make a poem, put it on a poster or something, and hang it on your wall. Who knows? So I've got to be honest here. I am pretty impressed with the way this thing was able to output fairly complete programs, albeit, it wasn't able to write in assembly perfect games, like full-fledged games like Donkey Kong or something like that, but it was able to give an example that I could then take and put into a form that worked on the Commodore 64. And just so you know, there was no trickery involved because I was using the emulator a lot just for simplicity. I did load the program onto my backbit here so we can see if the program will actually work on a real Commodore 64. So let's just go ahead and test this out. Here it is, hello2.prg. And there it is. It's working fine. In a weird way, it kind of spurred me into this couple of days worth of testing things out behind the scenes to try to get things working and to just learn how they work in general on the Commodore 64. So I think there's a lot of great applications for this tool. It certainly will get better and better over the next few years. So yeah, can ChatGPT write programs for the Commodore 64? Almost. Some simple ones, yes, and some complex ones with some help from us humans. So if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and hit the like button or subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber. If you're feeling really generous, you can always join my list of patrons. Their names will be coming up in the credits in just a minute, but their help really does support the channel, and I thank them for all their support. Until next time, thanks for watching. Patrons receive ad-free and early access to content after the episode commentary, and of course, your name in the credits. If you liked that episode, here's a few more you might enjoy, and I thank you for your support.
End of line.